listening to the Sit Down Standout Show, the podcast where people with all abilities and challenges can stand out from the rest, even if they've got to sit down to do it. I'm Ben Dykstra, the Rolling Dragon, and it's time for this show to take flight. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Sit Down Standout Show, the podcast that gives people with all abilities and challenges a chance to stand out from the rest, even if you have to sit down to do it. I am Ben Dykstra, the Rolling Dragon, and my guest with me today is a practitioner of Thai massage. She has got a degree in child special education. She is the executive director of Beyond Light and Love. She is an author. Ladies and gentlemen, Michelle Sokol. Michelle, how are you today?
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. It's a pleasure. After I read your story, I thought, she seems to fit the mold quite well for what we are looking for. All right, so let's get to the questions.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned in your profile that you are a person who was born on the autism spectrum. For someone who is not on the spectrum and does not know exactly what that's like, can you describe your experience growing up with autism and what it was like?
Absolutely. So I am autistic. We also have ADHD that is kind of a contender for symptomology. And I am a late diagnosed autistic adult. I was diagnosed I saw diagnosis after my son was diagnosed. And then we subsequently got the rest of the family evaluated as well. But growing up, ever since I was a very young child, there were a lot of really clear indicators that I was different and that I had a more sensitive system. I was a very colicky baby. I was a very picky eater as a child. I had a lot of sensory difficulties, especially like wearing socks with seams. I always preferred textures, like very smooth textures. And I always had special interests as a child. And in my family, it was common for people to be collectors. So my grandmother, who also had many collections of her own things, she, I guess, really poured in and enabled those special interests. So for a long time, my special interest was breeds of dogs, and I had little dog pet figurines. I don't know how well I know them now, but I definitely knew every dog breed, all the possibilities, all the traits. And then cats were my special interest. And as I got a little bit older, so one strength that really showed up as my talent very early on in my education and just a self-propelled interest, I wanted to read. And I begged my parents, I begged them, please buy me Hooked on Phonics. Like, please, I really wanted to learn. And, they would read to me at night. I remember how bad my father struggled with Dr. Seuss, but it was a lot of, Berenstain Bears and just your basics. But by the first grade, I was able to churn through, so I taught myself how to read. And in the first grade, I was able to pop through like a chapter book, maybe a Goosebumps or a Babysitter's Club. I could read multiple books within a day. And so it became very apparent very early on. Not only was I reading very quickly, I was reading at a level that was far beyond what I had been taught to. And I also was processing and digesting the information. So by the third or fourth grade, I don't know if you're familiar with the accelerated reading test, but they had incentive programs where you had to do a certain amount of reading. You would take a test based on the content of the test, and then you would get a certain amount of points. And I set a record at my elementary school for reading and getting the most points. They made a plaque, and they started a club. And in future years, children, of course, broke my record, but I set a benchmark of exceptional ability. And so, even though I wasn't diagnosed until adulthood, some of those strengths were very clear very early on. Um, I would say the weaknesses were as well, but ultimately, I curated a strength-based existence. And so my ability to remember information and retain information really propelled me into so I'm a master's of library information sciences, so I am a professional librarian. And then I'm a college educator and a professional educator, so I've been teaching for the last 15 years in a variety of capacity, but I'm also a trained librarian, so it's been really wonderful to take my strength of what I am good at, which is reading and processing information, and that I can take it to a level where I'm able to help other people and I'm able to assist them with helping and solving their problems. Because we all have so many problems. So,
We're all a little crazy in our own unique way, but I have to say that your abilities are very cool because even though it took you until you were an adult to get diagnosed, you never looked at your ability to process information and being able to read. Nobody ever looked at you with that as a bit of an abnormality. They looked at that as a gift. And that's what we try to do here on our show. We try to look at what life has to throw at you and we turn it into something positive. So let's skip forward a little bit. Now, you're a grown up, you have several children of your own who are also on the spectrum. Given that you were diagnosed with autism at a later age than most people, because it really depends. Some people don't figure out till the middle of their life. Some people figure out very early on. But what has it been like raising children on the spectrum compared to growing up on the spectrum?
that's a really wonderful question, and thank you for posing it that way. So, my children my children are the light of my life, and they bring so much joy to me, and I have always tried to be respectful of their unique selves in my parenting. Um, we weren't fully aware of autism as an option or even what it was until my 6-year-old, he's currently 6, when he was formally diagnosed at 2. That's when the symptoms and the condition were really brought to the forefront, and prior to that, we were aware of some of the ADHD traits that we dealt with, but we didn't really deep dive in until about 4 or 5 years ago. And while I have always tried to be as respectful to my children, I also, I come from a background where, my parents, they did their best. And I grew up in a household where and, my sister's neurodivergent and she had different struggles growing up. And I did not have those same struggles, but I have always helped and supported my sister through her life. And I know how important it is to support people and build them up, and that it's not your job as a parent is not to control your child or force them to be a person. And your job is to guide them and lovingly shape them so that the world can greet them lovingly, but they can also lovingly greet the world and to survive. And so my children are all very phenomenal and so high energy, so much energy. And one thing that I have really tried to do is just not just give them the space, but also there's so much anxiety that we have to work through and mood management because of all of the feelings and the sensory needs and the emotions. So we've really tried to be as emotionally intelligent and to teach them how to be resilient, how to overcome. We've really focused on teaching empathy and compassion and kindness and inclusivity. We are not, there is always room at our table um, for anybody. I would say, unless you're a boundary crosser or you broke the rules or, like there's, but I also teach
Right.
healthy boundaries, and because I that's something I see a lot of neurodivergent people struggle with. And I've worked a lot with supporting people in mental health, and I call it mental wealth, because our health is our best wealth. And if we can support other people to be their best, it makes the world a better place all around. And so in my parenting, I think the best thing I have learned is what a sensory diet is and how to accommodate sensory needs. I didn't realize sensory needs were controlling our life as much as they were, and not only my needs, but my children's needs. And I say all the time, you really don't know who you invite into your family, but if you're open to that child, you greet them lovingly no matter who they are. And some of my children, turns out, are very sensitive, just like the parents who made them. And so we have sometimes a lot of sensory needs and then a lot of energy flowing, and learning how to manage that and cope with that, but then also learning parenting strategies to effectively be positive, because when the default is that control, um sometimes that's all we know, so it takes an extra effort to learn empathy and to treat your children with extra kindness in those moments of struggle. And oh my gosh, we've learned so much about brains and neurological development as well. And that's really, I think, important to understand that brains do the best that they can do, at whatever age.
Oh, yeah. Every brain is unique. And that's one thing that I really feel like, in terms of talking about
Mhm.
autism, it's not explained enough to people that every case is unique. So what you have to do is a little bit of trial and error. I mean, I was not diagnosed with autism. I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy from being born prematurely. However, when it comes to people, regardless of what disability you get, unfortunately, as parents, you're going to have to deal with the challenge of trial and error, because you have to let your child develop as a person and physically, because when people are born with a condition like autism, it's impossible to tell how the child will turn out at the very beginning. So it's a matter of being patient, trying to figure it out, and showing compassion. As a child, if you're having a bit of a meltdown and you need to run away, unfortunately, a lot of people, because they've never really seen autism up close, they don't understand what's going on. There needs to be a larger amount of education.
Oh, I absolutely, absolutely agree. And I think different cities that I have visited, people have different amounts of awareness. And I think that the more people are educated and awareness spreads, the more inclusivity for all.
Exactly. Now, you've studied obviously a lot of things. You've studied as a practitioner for Thai massage. You've been a Reiki. Am I saying that right? Reiki healing? Reiki
Yes.
healing? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I do Usui Reiki energy work, and I'm a master teacher. Um, and so you learn how the body works and how the brain creates a relaxation response, and how it's all also interconnected in our muscular and our cellular being.
Okay. Okay. So my question on that is, basically you have studied a ton of stuff, but what I'm wondering is, has it all helped in the process of developing? Because for your nonprofit organization, your mindset has basically been positive problem solving.
So my it's interesting because I guess my range of educational journey has been, there's a logical aspect that guided me through it, and then there's an intuitive aspect that I fell into. And I started my education out. I originally wanted to become an English teacher, and then I wanted to be a librarian after that. And as I got deeper into my educational journey, I really enjoyed the executive management aspect of it. I enjoyed the leadership ability. And as I studied more, I applied for law school, and I was waitlisted. And the second time they waitlisted me, I was I sent them a rejection letter.
My goodness,
I
that's
took
rare.
a rejection letter. I said, I am a diamond in the rough and I will shine no matter what opportunity I am presented with. Um, I've studied a lot of nonprofit organizational management, and then alongside the body work and the energy work. And I have a whole background in child development and family studies. So there's a lot of practical application to what I've learned because, I do have multiple children. I am a mother. I have been very, knee deep in it. I tell you, infant massage is the best thing ever. Nobody's ever complained about a good foot massage. But
They're probably all snoring by the time you're done.
I haven't had any complaints yet. But I find that, sometimes, especially when I work with clients, maybe they come to me for a foot massage, but then it opens up the door to other problems or other anxieties that they're encountering. And when I have such a wide range of ability of education, but also problem solving, it's enabled me to provide resources and really helpful. I seek to support people and to build them up and to send them forward on their journey. Like, I don't control them. I don't decide what they'll do with the information, but information empowers people to make better decisions
Right.
about their life. Nobody wants to stay stuck in their problems. Some people do. They do though. But when someone is actively seeking resources to move forward and move ahead, that's the fun part. People come to me for a foot massage and then they walk out and I've solved their deepest emotional difficulties with them.
Hey, my fellow standouts, it's the Rolling Dragon Ben and Dykstra, here to ask you a couple of questions as we reach the halfway point in our program. Has life thrown you a curveball? Have you lived with what many people would consider unfortunate circumstances or unique challenges? How have you turned them around into something positive for yourself and for others? Is it your time to stand out from the rest? Well then, register as a guest at www.rollingdragonmedia.com and get ready to stand out from the rest. And now, for the rest of our story. Well, if you ever come to Canada, I might have to call you up to get one of those massages. But you've worked with both children, infants, and
Mhm.
adults. Can you share some of your favorite success stories, whether it's been working with children or adults, regardless of whether it's helping them work through their autism or their physical conditions?
Absolutely. So, I guess I'll make a cornerstone. I'll have four quick examples I'll roll through. I'll start with infants, and most essentially, let me tell you about my son. Now, my son, as a baby, he was my third baby. And from the moment that he was born, you could tell he was a very sensitive person. And the midwives also advised us, it would be good to make sure he gets checked out by a neurologist at some point because he was sensitive. So my son has a very highly sensitive nervous system, and I do too. I'm not surprised where he got it from. But as an infant, infants are such a primal stage of development. And if you imagine what it's like to be stuck in a infant's body, they have no muscular control. They have no freedom to do as they want. And if they have sensitivities or, difficulties, the only way they can communicate is through their cries. And my son was a very sensitive baby. He really required a lot of very careful attention. He didn't like to be wet. He didn't like to wear certain types of clothing. He needed to have constant movement. There was always an aspect of the massage that was helping. And so with the skills I helped him, he's, I would say, a very healthy 6-year-old. Um, and we made it through some of those most really difficult formative years just with all of the plethora of skills I had. It enabled us to do the best we could. Um, so I guess he's my I call him my big boy heirloom tomato. I love him so much. But
Aw.
he is if you were in my garden, I would say look at this example of this fine child because he is my heart. Um
Okay, that's example
example
number
one.
one. You said you had
Yes,
four.
example two, I've worked with so toddlers and younger children when they don't have that ability to fully communicate, they they still have big feelings. Well, they still have big feelings and they still have needs to be respected and understood as a person. And so there are times in my education or training where I've helped to facilitate that those needs for that communication to adult caregivers who don't fully understand. They would assume this child is old enough to talk, so this child should be able to communicate these things. But as we know, with neurodivergencies, there's so many communication differences, and oftentimes, if if we're not adapted to the mainstream, we quickly get lost in the stream or get brushed to the side. And that can be
Right.
very difficult and damaging for, young children who are still developing their sense of self and their sense of confidence and their self-esteem. And so, that would be a good example of how I have used that tool my tools and skills in early childhood. In adulthood, example number three, I work with adults of many ages and stages, and I teach them how to, I guess, holistically. But we have all sorts of like naturopathic ways and qigong and yoga and meditation, and there are so many helpful tools that have been discovered to help get the brain and the body back to a state of homeostasis. And so I work with my clients individually to kind of they're all sensitive people. That's kind of the target crowd I end up working with ends up all being sensitive people. And it I work with them. How do we tap into those sensitivities? How do we enable their skills to be not so much more resiliency, but how do I validate those experiences? Because here's the fourth example. I have a client, a very near and dear to me client. She is in her 90s. Um, and I would come and visit her in her home and I would provide her, I wouldn't even massage her. Her skin was just so sensitive. So I would just provide the healing, Reiki work. And it's very calming, it's very relaxing. And in that situation, we build bonds of trust, we build rapport, we build a lot of nonverbal communication aspects. And I'm there to support her. And there was one particular instance where she shared some abuse that she had been carrying and some trauma that had been with her, somewhere packed deep in her. She had been carrying that for over 70 years,
Wow.
70, 80 years. And I provided a safe space where she felt safe to share that. And I do that with all ages. But this particular client, I can't imagine carrying something like that for 90 years
No, I don't think
until
anybody could.
and at the end of those days when sensitive brains, people deal with dementia, there's all sorts of difficulties at the end of life. But I treat all of my clients at every age and stage with all of the ability of respect because no matter where they are in life's journey, their perspective is valid and their feelings are valid, and nobody deserves to kind of be unheard. And so that is what I do at all ages. I provide that respectful, safe space. And I would say people bring me, they're strange and they're weird. I'm not a therapist, but and I always provide reference to therapists if it feels something is, outside of my scope of what I can help them with. But I say on positive problem solving because negative problem solving doesn't help anyone.
That just makes
And
more.
Yeah, well, and sometimes you can still lay that out as an option. If you're having financial options, I would not say go rob a bank.
Right.
But and I don't want to run into like liability issues if I even chit chat with somebody and then they take it a little too literally.
Right.
Because but I think sometimes when we get stuck in a rut with whatever problem we may have, it can be really difficult to pull ourselves out. And so it's a familiar scaffolding that I've worked with my students for many years, but it's just in helping people. I say we can identify 3 ways to solve this problem. And one of those, well, 4, and one of them is do nothing. We just let the problem be. We kind of can follow the pros and cons and sit together and those problems make once those problems dissolve or they feel a little bit lifted, you know people are able to move forward. And with neurodivergent differences and the communication differences, I deal with a lot of people who maybe have tried in the past to work with professionals or have already tried, but they're already also dealing with a lot of difficulties and resiliency. They have a lot of rejection sensitivity. And, sometimes they feel like they've given their best effort and it didn't work. So why try again?
Right. But unfortunately, Michelle, I believe we are running out of time on this interview, but I want to thank you for simply presenting everyone here who is listening to the show a positive thing. Everyone's opinion is valid. Everyone's feelings should be respected. Just the lesson of today's show is to treat everyone as human, to give them your space, give them their time, and give them your love. We will have links to all of your novels in the description below. But until next time, this has been an episode of the Sit Down Standout Show. And always remember,
Thank you for having me.
it takes physical strength to stand up, but inner strength to stand out from the rest. I'm Ben and Dykstra, and we will see you next time.